Okay, I'd like to call the special meeting of the fire department to order at 4 p.m. on the 8th. Oh, okay. Let's try the 6th. Sorry, that's good. Then the meeting over to the chief.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming today to this meeting for discussions on a levy and or bond issue measure for the fire district in 2023. I'll start out with any questions from the commissioners.
Not yet. Okay, maybe later.
Okay, so last meeting I was asked to come up with further projections, and I've added the 55 and 60 cent projections down at the bottom. So for what it would bring into the district, if you want the projections added to what the house value would be, I would need to do that for you. But down at the bottom, you'll see the 55 and 60 cents and what that would potentially bring into the district in additional funds. So for a 55-cent levy, it would raise approximately $514,000. Our initial year, obviously that would go up with the 1%. Our budget would be approximately the 1.1 million. If we went to a 60-cent levy, in addition to what we currently have at a 69-cent levy or 0.693, it would bring in about 1.2 million, and that would be another 561,000 approximately brought into the district. So, and then I can, obviously the cost, I would have to do that for our next meeting on the 12th. So just so everybody knows, our next special meeting is going to be on the 12th. So June 12th at 4 p.m. Zoom link will be sent out as well. I need to preference this meeting with hopefully a broader understanding of why we are needing to expand our levy again from the levy that we took out in 2010. Right now, we're spending our operational funds. And so we have an approximate budget of $648,000 for operational expenses. And last year, we put away only $11,000 of that. To put that in perspective, that doesn't even outfit my engines with tires to the cost of today. And I think people need to understand that the levies we've had in the past, including the one that was approved in 2010, those levies are utilized for both operational expenses and also capital fulfillment projects. So we, and I bet I would have to say that's been the better part of 20 years. Again, I think there was a bond. I'm having difficulty finding information on it, but I'm going to reach out to the county again. I reached out to them prior to this meeting and did not hear back. So hopefully by the 12th, I'll have some further information for you on when a bond was taken, what year, how much it was, and how long we had to pay it back. And I believe the last one is potentially around that 1991 era when we purchased our big engine 5802. Again, that some money was used from the bingo, as far as I understand, obviously way before my time. And then there could have been a potential bond measure to make up the difference. So increasing the levy has always supported both operational expenses and our ability to fulfill capital infrastructure improvements. So at least for the better part of the last 20, if not more years. Okay, so I need to start the meeting out with that because I've been getting some conversations on, well, that's an operational expense. It's not a capital facilities expense. Well, the monies we bring in from our levy, we divvy that money up to suffice both areas. Speaking of a levy, so as everybody can see on the values that are currently up in front of you, if we take a 45-cent levy, again, the $640,000 that we are currently bringing into the district, we are spending that on operational costs. That's for our volunteers, that's to maintain the fire hall, insurance, everything you can think of that we have to outfit ourselves with, provide for response, training, all of those things. That money is basically a zero sum at this point, meaning that we're coming to an equality with those funds. So this is why we're here. This is why we're discussing adding additional funds through either a levy or a bond measure. So the money that you're looking at on the table today in front of you is the money that would be added to our operational and capital facility infrastructure expenditures in our accounts to be able to overcome basically the $4 million. It's 4.2. I've had some good discussions with some people too, that they feel some of the items within our capital facilities plan should be taken out because it's more of an operational expense. But as I just explained, both operational expenses and capital facility infrastructure has always been taken out of one levy in the district, with exception to 1991 or around that era with purchasing a new engine. So what does this mean to our current capital facilities plan? Well, I'm happy to go through that plan and remove some of the more lighter items, I would say, or expectant items, and restructure that. But again, we're looking at maybe $150,000 worth of items, and we're still looking at a $4 million deficit for capital infrastructure. Now, that doesn't even discuss our operational expenses. So again, these monies have to be understood that it's going to be supporting both operational and capital facility improvements. Now, some people have stated in conversations, and again, I really appreciate the conversations and the ability to converse with people over this, is, take a lighter levy, a 30-cent levy, let's say, and in a couple of years do a non-voted bond for, let's say, $2 million. What the public needs to understand is we are currently a debt-free agency. So we are debt-free. We don't have any expectant payments to anyone that could potentially be defaulted on, depending on where the economics of our current situation in our country go. So that is a good thing, to be a debt-free agency, and not, we own everything in this agency, all of our equipment, everything. We don't have any lease payments, nothing that would have to be met regardless of financial issues within this agency. So we're currently debt-free. We have been for many, many years, before my time as the chief as well. Again, the only time we may have taken debt on, and again, I'm trying to do my best to research that back, is potentially the bond issue for the engine and any other private loans that may have been taken out before my time. So I do know, since my time taking over in 2012, and prior to that, with the other previous chiefs, both Bill Skinner and Nick Kaninsky, we were also a levy-based agency and debt-free as well. So we've always saved up money and then purchased our items. And that's, I think that's very responsible to the taxpayers. So if we did a 30-cent levy, that would bring in approximately $280,000. Again, looking at that, that would be in addition to the operational funds that we currently have. So we'd be looking at a budget of around 835 or 928,000. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong line, 928,000. So you have to look at it. We're already spending the 648,000 we're bringing in currently. So now we add the additional 280,000, and we have a $4 million deficit for infrastructure. And that doesn't include the increase in operational expenditures and cost that we're going to have to be going through for the next decade, decade and a half, of a potential length of an approved levy measure or a bond measure. Now, bond measures, you pay out depending on the cost, but most people, most agencies do a 20-year payback on that bond. So if I do a 30-cent levy and in a couple of years we do a non-voted bond, meaning that we would not have to go out to the public for an approval of that bond, each million worth of a bond costs the district $75,000 in payment. So that comes from Davidson and Son. So that comes from the bond issuer. Those numbers are from them. So we're looking at $75,000 per million of a bond issue that we would take out on top of the levy. Now, each million of a bond correlates into 9 cents of an additional levy. So we've discussed a lot about a 45-cent bond, or sorry, excuse me, 45-cent levy. That's kind of where we're at this point, is like a 45-cent levy. So if we took a 30-cent bond and then took out a $2 million or 30-cent levy, and then took out a $2 million bond in the years to come, that would be equivalent to a 48-cent levy. Now, the bond obviously is now paid back over 20 years, and that debt is going to be passed on to the next generation of this community. Most of us will not be part of this agency or community in 20 years. I don't like that concept of passing debt on to the next generation of this community. That's why I lean towards the levy measure and paying things as we're able to accrue the funds. That will delay, obviously, that will delay some of the timeframes that we currently have in our capital facilities plan, which is a projection of the needs of this district, above and beyond our daily operational needs of the district. Now, when it comes to being able to house my firefighters, and we're getting more female firefighters on the agency as well, but I also believe that the male firefighters, we have a room upstairs that sleeps 6, and they're in bunk beds. As you know, we believe new fire stations, they're all built with single rooms, and being able to have privacy for both males and females, so they're not getting dressed, they're not doing those types of things in front of somebody else. I'm at a conundrum, actually, because I may not have enough space if I have 3 females on duty at one time. They would take the larger room. We do have a room upstairs that becomes the females' room and has a bunk room, so it could house 2 females potentially in that room. But I'm in a place that I don't have enough rooms for the amount of males or females that I necessarily will have on duty, and to be able to separate them out appropriately. Expanding this fire station at this point is looking at about a $2 million project. And that would be extending out the upstairs, building up more diversity, equity, inclusion space up there. So DEI is a huge thing in our communities now, and in the fire industry, law enforcement industry, pretty much any industry out there. But to provide more privacy, more equitable spaces for our volunteers to have as a singular person. That's not even on the radar yet. That's not even on the radar. That's not even a concept yet. The best we could do is maybe build a couple extra bedrooms upstairs over the next 5 to 7 years, and be able to provide more private spaces for our males and females to have their own rooms at this point. So that's something else. So there's projects that aren't even concepts at this point. We can only go out so far. It's a very dynamic process. Obviously, our capital facilities plan from 2018 has been very dynamic. We have not been able to finalize everything that was on that plan for the years between 2018 and 2023. We've had to push some of those items out because of our financial situation. I'd have to look back on the plan, but we, within the current plan, let me bring that up. I want to say, I'd have to compare it back to the 2018 because I don't want to necessarily misspeak, but these are the projects that we did complete in 2018, 2019, 2020, 21, and 2022. And I'd have to go back and I'd have to look back and see what projects, but I know there's things that we've had to postpone since that time frame, just because of not knowing where we're going to be financially and not just burning through our reserves. And again, for the public, right now we have about 1.1 million in reserves, but I think it's very prudent to maintain at least $500,000 of that for exceptional conditions in economic downfall or economics in general, to protect this district and to maintain emergency services through any financial difficult times in the future. So let's say we have $600,000 to utilize immediately to start utilizing on our capital infrastructure. $600,000 would buy me a new engine, so I'd be able to replace one of my new engines potentially. It would also do two projects. It would hopefully be able to redo our parking lot and also purchase a new ambulance for us, which currently I have a grant out for. I think I'm more positive towards my radio grant with our portable radios and our mobile radios, which is over $300,000, than I am on getting a grant for a $300,000 ambulance from AFG, regardless that our ambulance is 32 years old, same age as basically our biggest fire truck. But if I get those grants, obviously, then that can be taken away from the capital, infrastructure plan and be a savings, for us. But grants are never guaranteed. So those are the issues. And I'll keep putting out for grants. I don't have any problem, but I can't do it for 10 years and then be 10 years behind on where we should have replaced something, 9 years ago, type of thing. So I'll keep doing that, and hopefully you are successful at these grants, because if both of those grants come through, then that would take about a $700,000 chunk out of our capital facilities needs over the next 13 years. And then we would revise the capital facilities plan and go from there. So again, this is a moving target. We did the best we could, working with the commissioners, working with Patty, and working with the county to come up with a plan that would project everything honestly and justly to the public and to the commission to show our potential needs in the future. And it has to be dynamic. This cannot be a static plan, because if we don't have the money, in 2024 to replace our portable radios because I didn't get the grant, then we are unable to spend this $376,000 that's projected it's going to cost to redo our radio systems and our apparatus and our portable radios for our firefighters, because they are currently out of date. They are currently not being supported by the manufacturer anymore, and it's hard to get parts for them. So, and they're not P25 qualified, which is the newest standard for safety purposes. And that came into effect after 9/11. So going back to the finances, the videos are up online for the public to watch. It's underneath the public info section on our website. And the video with our attorney, Brian Snur, and then the gentleman from Davidson Company, which is the bond issuer, one of the bond issuers, but that's who would most likely be utilized and works with fire districts throughout the state. We're on that video, and there's a ton of great information on that video, and I would advise, and hopefully the majority of the public has seen that video or participated in that meeting, but it has a great deal of information to explain to you the different types of levies. Now, I can go over that, and then also the bond issues. I can go over that real quick and go over the types of levy options that we have as a fire district. So one of the options we have is a permanent single year lid lift. And that's a levy, and it would require voter approval and would establish new level for the 1% increases thereafter. So that's a permanent single year lid lift. We have a temporary single year lid lift, which requires voter approval and would establish a 1-year increase. But after that, the revenue reverts back to what it was previously prior to that lift. So that would be going backwards. It would put us into most likely a worse financial situation. Anything that we do in improving our infrastructure has to be able to be supported by our current levy. Now, I stated that every million in a non-voted bond would cost, and either way, the taxpayers are paying for it, right? But a non-voted bond comes out of our current revenue stream. So the current levy has to be able to support those payments. So if we go back to the previous screen, I'll bring that back up. If we go back to this screen here, and we look at if we took a 30-cent levy, that would bring in an additional $280,000. And that everybody goes, that's a lot of money, right? That's a lot of money. Then we take a $2 million non-voted bond. And every million is $75,000 in payment. And so every year, out of that extra $280,000, $150,000 of that would go to bond payment for 20 years. And I think that's what the public needs to understand. So we would only have $130,000 going back into our operational funds and capital facility funds in order to support our necessities over the next 13 years. And again, just looking at capital facilities, we have $4 million worth of capital facility improvements, vehicles, infrastructure, those types of things laid out in that plan. And that's also online. And it should be on our website. I'm sorry, I didn't make sure that it was still linked properly today, but I'll do that after this meeting. So going back to the levies, we have that permanent single year, we have the temporary single year lift, and then we have a permanent multi-year lift. And that requires voter approval and would allow the district to increase the growth factor past the legal 100%. So let me explain that. The growth factor was set by a Tim Eyman initiative many years ago. And it allows districts like ours to only take 1% increases a year on our previous year's revenue or taxable revenue, taxable income. So with that, so $648,000 budget, I can only increase my budget by 1% next year based off of that $648,000. And these are rough numbers, so please don't hold these to me or email me that I was wrong on my math, because this is just, I'm trying to just speak in pretty specific generals, but it's not, down to the last penny. We would be looking at a $6,400 increase, basically, if we were able to take a 1% increase off of that $648,000. That doesn't even really realistically outfit one of my firefighters with full gear of $6,400 increase. So you can see the issue that we have is that if we do take a lower levy and then add on a non-voted bond with payments of $75,000 per million, and we have to take that payment out of our current revenue stream, which is the levy. It's not an additional bond. If we have a voted bond, that's additional to the taxpayers. That's put on your tax rolls as well. So our levy stays the same and we're able to utilize that. And then the taxpayers through an additional tax pay back that levy, okay, over the next 20 years. But in a non-voted bond, it has to come out of our current levy revenue streams. So you can see how $130,000 that's left after we would do a $2 million bond at $75,000 per million would only give us $130,000 a year to try to overcome a $4 million deficit in infrastructure and also pay for the increasing cost of operational expenditures of our day-to-day. So if you have any questions on that, please email me, please call me. I'd love to go get coffee with you to sit down and to have a great conversation, because there's some good ideas out there and I'm happy to listen and happy to have those conversations with you. So the permanent multi-year lid lift. So going back to the growth factor, right now we can only take 1%. So we can take 100% of last year. So we can stay at 648,000. These are rough numbers, 648,000. We can definitely take that. And then we take 1% on top of that. That's all we're able to increase our revenue per year. And you can see how inflation and the cost of just doing daily business and the cost of items and infrastructure things will easily start overrunning what we're bringing in on revenue. I've stated it many times, right now I can't even outfit our volunteers who you rely on and that provide you service with all the gear that they need. A lot of them have to come in and spend hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on protective equipment that I can't afford at this point. So the permanent multi-year lift, we can increase the growth factor. District chooses percentage to increase, and that can be anything. I could say, let's take it to 108%. And if the commissioners agree to that, great, we can take it to 108%. And we would take that over the years 2 through 6. And that would increase our budget by 40%, on the base revenue. And then that would be our new top. Okay, for our 1% after those 6 years. So I mean, that's something to look at too. But then we stop. The process is 1% after that. So let's say we did that and we were able to get our revenue up to $800,000. Okay, over that 5 years with 108%, with an 8% increase each year. Now that increases up to $800,000, let's say, from 648,000. Then we're only able to take 1% every year beyond that on the 800,000. So again, we're back down to only being able to increase our budget $8,000 a year from that point forwards. We have a temporary multi-year lid lift, and that follows the same thing as above. We can increase the growth factor. At the end of the lift cycle, though, which is usually 6 years or the 5 years of a true lift cycle, it would revert back to, again, what it was prior to the lift for the 1%. So we get all the way up to 800,000, but then we drop back down to 648 after year 5 or 6. Excess levies, those are usually used beyond if we're already at $1.50 per thousand per value. Right now, we're at 69 cents per thousand on your home. That is our current levy. Last year, it was 84 cents or 85.5 because the valuation of the community went up from $740 some thousand to 400, sorry, that's million, 740 million. The valuation of all our properties went up. All of our taxes went up, as everybody has noticed. But now the valuation of the community is 935 million. Our next valuation will be over $1 billion. That's the projection that's there. We're definitely going to go above 70 some million on our next valuation in 2 to 5 years. So every time the valuation of the community goes up, the levy goes down to compensate. We still get the same amount of money in, but the levy goes down. Now, over time, as we're seeing now, over the past 13 years, 12, 13 years, the cost of operational supplies and personnel and also inflation has now brought us to a stalemate with our current revenue stream that we have. And that's why we're here today and with all these meetings to discuss where we need to go to maintain the current services that we have, hopefully be able to add future services, but also to be able to overcome and improve our infrastructure within the agency for the community and for the taxpayers. So that's where we're currently at. So do I have any questions from the commissioners regarding that information? So I'll review for the public. If we take a 45-cent levy, everybody can see the piece of paper that's in front of you on your computers. 45-cent levy, again, we're utilizing the 648,000 and plus minus that we currently have for operational expenditures. Last year, we had roughly $11,000 that went into reserve capacity. You can see how putting $11,000 away a year is not going to be able to overcome a $4 million deficit, okay, in any reasonable time frame. In my life, most likely, would not be able to do that. Speaking of a levy, so we take a 45-cent levy, 40-cent levy, you can see where the numbers are. If we take a 45-cent levy, our 2010 levy was 40 cents. I'll just remind people of that. That was a 40-cent levy back in 2010. 45-cent levy would bring in an additional $420,000 plus change there. That's projected based off of our current community valuation of $935 million. Okay. So obviously, if the community valuation goes up, that projection would increase with that, but the levy would go down in comparison. So if the valuation actually goes backwards and goes back to 800 million when they do the reevaluation, then the levy mill rate goes up. Does that make sense? So it's, yeah. So it's an interesting dynamic. So let's say we have that 400, so just taking off the numbers that are on your screen with the current valuation, we have the $420,000. We decide to, off the top of that, we decide to put $300,000 a year away, okay, for our infrastructure. Now this would be discussed with the commissioners, maybe more maybe less is put away. That would leave us approximately $120,000 to put back into operational expenditures, okay, for the volunteers, for equipment, for gear, everything else like that. So that would boost our operational budget up to where we could afford to do more things for the community and also for our volunteers. And then we'd have a solid $300,000 going into capital reserve. So to put that into concepts is it would take me 2 years to save up $600,000 to buy a new fire truck. Okay, to replace a fire truck. All the other things that are on the capital facilities plan that we would go through with other administrative things, vehicles, those types of things are laid out. And again, over the next 13 years, it's 4.2 million. And if we go back in and we adjust and we clean it up a little bit, get some of the fray away that some people have discussed with me, and I'm fine with looking at that and discussing that with the commissioners, we're still looking at 4 million. So over a 10-year period, we're looking at being able to accrue 3 million, okay, from putting away $300,000 a year. We're still short after 10 years of getting to our 4 million expectation. Now, things are going to come up. Things are going to come up over that 10 years that are going to have to be overcome, that are going to most likely kick something off of our capital facilities plan and take precedent over. Can I say what those things would be? Not necessarily, but if we wreck a vehicle and we don't want to go through insurance, so we don't get that increase in insurance premium, then we buy out a new vehicle straight out, right? And that's something that is chosen by many districts. If they have enough reserve, they'll replace their vehicles out of reserve versus doing it through their insurance companies, because as everybody knows, if you have a claim with your insurance company, your premiums usually go up following years. And anytime we have a claim, that's on our district's insurance radar for 5 years, I believe. Okay. So that's a straight levy. And again, I'll go back that the levy is what we've been operating off since 2010. And the time frame before that was a straight levy. And if I'm incorrect, if somebody says, well, in 2005, we took a bond, well, then I need to know that, because I don't have that current information, and I'm happy to adjust what I'm saying if that is the case. But from what I've done, the research and talking to previous financial is we didn't take a bond back then. The last known bond, to my knowledge, is the bond for the engine 5802, which was approximately around that 1991 era. So, yeah. So the levy supports both capital and operational expenses. So again, I have those discussions with people that say, well, take out a bond for the capital. Well, people need to understand the cost of that bond. And each million of a bond is 9 cents, is equated to a 9-cent levy. So if we take 2 million out, it's an additional 18-cent levy to the taxpayer on top of the current levy in place. And then if we do a non-voted bond, because a levy, a voted in levy, which would be an additional tax on your tax rolls, or sorry, I really apologize for not saying levy bond correctly, but let me go back. A voted bond is put on your tax rolls. A non-voted bond, which the district with our current valuation and calculations by the bond company, we can take up to like 3.5 million on a non-voted bond. Each million of that non-voted bond, therefore, then has to come out of our current levy revenue stream. It is not an additional tax paid back on your tax rolls in addition to the current levy for the district. So I'll go back to the example that I gave. $280,000, each million is $75,000 in payment for 20 years. Okay, that's a 20-year payment. So if we took it down to 10, that'd be $150,000 per million. Just doing simple math, maybe less, but just doing simple math. Because it cuts a time in half, right? So if 20 years is 75,000, we would project 10 years would be 150,000 per million. If I took 2 million out and we wanted to do it in 2 years, we don't have the levy to support that. And I think everybody can do the math on that. But then again, we're currently debt-free. That would place us into a debt agency for 20 years at that point, with no ability to say, we can't pay your $75,000 this year. Those bond payments have to be met every single year. And if we default, then that's even a worse position to be in as an emergency services agency. We would be tied to that payment for 20 years. And again, most of us won't even be around in 20 years. So I would much rather, in my thinking, but it's ultimately commissioner's choice, is to stay as a debt-free agency. To utilize a levy, as we have done in my projections over the last 2 decades or even further, to support operations and to overcome our capital facility needs. And again, yes, will our capital facility infrastructure plan have to be pushed out? Yes, it'll have to be pushed out.
So we can still get bond if we need it.
And we could still get bond in the future. You know, if I don't know why you would take out a $500,000 bond and then be tied to that payment for 10 years, right? Again, it's like somebody becoming the credit card frenzy. I mean, that's an example that was given to me is credit card analogy. People get a brand new credit card with a $10,000 limit on it, and they go, oh my gosh, I have all this money now, and they forget about the responsibility of the payment back.
The bill that comes every month.
And it overcomes them very quickly, right? It overcomes them. So they spend the money very quickly, but then the reality hits in that, oh boy, I have a $200 payment for the next 20 years to pay off this $10,000, right? If I pay the minimum payment. So, and I would prefer not to put the district into a debt position with a potential default if things really get hard on us financially in the years to come. I'd much rather, again, do it through a levy. And as we are able to save up funds, we would prioritize our biggest needs first. As we're able to save up funds, utilize, $600,000, $700,000 out of our current reserve capacity, maintaining responsibility to the public that we have enough to provide services and continuation of this district for at least 6 months, if not a year, if we go into economic hardship in the future, and then start overcoming our operational issues that we have and are fulfilling our capital facility needs.
Costs are always going to be there.
And I would hopefully be able to see, and nobody knows where we're going to be economically as a country, what things are going to cost in 10 years. We can project. That's all that is projections. And we do our best to project. And sometimes it'll be right on, sometimes it'll be high, sometimes it'll be low, but that's projections. If anybody invests in the stock market, we project. And I can't say where we're going to be in 10 years. My hope is that a levy of a 45-cent levy or 40-cent levy, or the commissioners decide to go to 50, would last us for the next decade and a half, that we could get 15 years out of that while being able to overcome all of our capital facility infrastructure needs, if not the majority of them, over that period of time, and being able to support the men and women who provide the services, and to do more in our community risk reduction programs and outreach to the community. And I mentioned before, of different programs that would, not programs, but items that could potentially be removed from the expectation of the taxpayer, in addition to a levy, would be we wouldn't charge any more for ambulance transports. We would implement, a new service that would go down and pick our community residents, up from the hospital when they would need to return home. Now, I preface that with sometimes people have a record, a felony record that would not allow us to do that because they're not admissible into Canada. So outside of those individuals who live within our community, I've stated this numerous times that a lot of people choose not to go when they are sick, right, to the hospital because they have no one to bring them back home. And Circle of Care has done a great job, and this would supplement the services that they're providing as well. I could bring on 5 members of the community to be part of this team, pay them a stipend to be able to go down at 2 a.m. and pick one of our patrons up, utilize our vehicles, utilize our maintenance, our gas, everything else, so they're not utilizing their personal vehicles to do that, and be able to support, and work alongside of Circle of Care and other community organizations that are trying to put that together currently. But definitely have hopefully a stable process in that and not have to always put it on one person. So that would be an idea as well. Right now, we take people to collections if their insurance doesn't pay the transport fee. And that's no different than any other district out there. We have costs. And right now, again, I've pointed out that our operational budget is being utilized, and we need to find a new stream of revenue to take us into the future, operationally and also infrastructure.
You don't have any questions? Okay. Do we want to give the audience an opportunity to ask questions?
That is completely up to you.
I think there are probably some that might want to.
So we'll open this up to any of the public members. Just remember that this meeting is being recorded. And to ask any questions, and I'll do my best. The commissioners will do their best to answer any questions that you may have. And again, we may not be able to answer everything that you have, but if I can't, then I'll find out the information and get back to you. So not sure if we have anybody that currently has a question.
I have earphones on.
Okay, so
we could all appreciate this meeting.
Yeah, if everybody can mute themselves. If everybody can mute themselves until I'm able to call on you. And otherwise, we're going to be talking over each other. So there was an individual that came through. Linda, do you know who that was?
Steve.
That was Steve. Okay, Steve, go ahead and go with your question.
So no question, I'm just trying to maneuver this Zoom.
What? I'm sorry, we didn't understand that.
Sorry, no question. I was just trying to navigate the Zoom. Sorry.
Oh, okay, understand. Sorry about that. I'm going to mute you real quick, okay?
Thank you.
Okay, does anybody in the group have any questions that would like to, in the public meeting, ask a question? If you want to email me, that's perfectly fine as well. If you want to get together for coffee, great. Hi, Pat, go ahead.
Hi there. Sorry, I arrived late, so I missed the first 8 minutes or so. So did you ever prepare various financial scenarios based upon the different levy amounts? I gave you a worksheet showing it from, can't remember what it started out, but it ended up about 60 cents per thousand. Did you ever do that and look at that?
We're still working on that, Pat. Financially, I haven't been able to validate those numbers yet. So what I did discuss with the public today is people need to understand that the levies pretty much for the last 2 decades, if not further, have supported both operational expenditure and capital facility expenditure. And
yeah, I heard that.
Okay, that's what this, go ahead.
Okay, I heard that part. I mean, capital expenditures are quite often paid for by using bonds. I mean, it's an established way of doing it. It's you're using an analogy of credit cards, but I think a better analogy would be a mortgage. You get a mortgage so you can afford to buy a house now, not 30 years from now when your needs may have changed. So, I mean, if you've got expensive pieces of equipment, fire trucks or whatever, that are 30 years old now, I don't understand why one would wait 10 years to save up for it when you can get a bond that can pay for that. I mean, the whole point of a capital facilities plan is to figure out what you need and what the schedule is, and to base your money draws accordingly. I'm just curious why you're so against getting a bond. I mean, the thing is about a bond is that once it's paid, then it's off of the taxes. Whereas if you're just going to increase to the max on a levy, then that's always there. Now, it may be that it always will need to be there, but I think it's a combination between the two that you need to look at. And I'd be interested to know why. I mean, no one likes being in debt, but there's a reason why governments go into debt, and that's because they pretty much have a guaranteed source of income. Well, it was a question like, I don't understand the rationale behind not wanting to consider what is a common method of financing for fire districts and all other tax districts across the country, which is bonds.
Well, some taxing districts do use bonds, some aren't able to, as was explained in the video, right, of the bond issuer. And some people are utilizing extra money that they're getting from the federal government, which we don't get from the federal government, to pay back that bond issue. And that's because of ambulance transports. So the GEMT money, we don't have access to that because we don't transport those types of people to get that revenue back into this district. So some districts are looking at, well, we can do a bond and we're getting $300,000 a year in GEMT money from all the transports that we do. That's what they're utilizing to pay back the bond on.
But if we took out a bond, we would have paid that back.
Well, either way, the taxpayers are paying back a bond. It either gets added to their tax rolls in a separate, payment above and beyond the levy, right, that is currently in place, or we do a non-voted bond, which would have to come out of the levy's revenue that we currently have in place. And each million of a bond is $75,000 in payment, and that's for 20 years.
But that's why you're talking about increasing the levy, is to be able to pay for things like that. Am I all right?
Well, if we can satisfy our plan with putting away $300,000 a year, if we took a 45-cent levy out, if we could overcome the majority of our capital facilities within the 10 to 15 years, with a levy, and then start saving for remodeling of the station, as I mentioned earlier, with the issues that we're starting to get into with the males and females that we have on the agency, and other items that are going to be coming up over the next 15 to 20 years, then I believe we're still debt free, right? We didn't get ourselves into a potential default situation. And we weren't tied to that. So it leaves us more flexibility to be able to do what comes up in the future. Again, the capital facilities plan, I'm not sure if I'm the first chief to put together a plan like that you've seen since 2018, but what it is it's projection. I think maybe that's the first time we've put down on paper. I don't know what happened 20, 30 years ago, but that we actually put down a plan this robust on paper for us to show the community and to have a projection of what those types of expenditures are going to be. We're spending our $648,000. So again, I'll go back. We had $11,000 that we put into capital reserve. We're spending our operational funds out of our current revenue right now. And that's going to come to a head, I believe, in 2025. Our revenue stream doesn't keep pace with what our expenditures are going to be projected, I believe, in 2025. I'd have to go back to the plan, but I'm pretty sure it's 2025. So if I'm able to, express keeping the district debt-free and owning all of our infrastructure and being able to pay for it as we go, and be able to put away enough money that, yeah, it takes us 2 years extra to save up for a fire truck, but we don't have a 20-year payment on $75,000 or $150,000. Again, I mean, that's a payment that has to be made. There's no choice on that. It has to be made. Otherwise, we default as an agency. And then where do we go as a district? I think that's very irresponsible to the taxpayer. But then again, every million of a bond is equivalent to 9-cent levy. So if I take 2 million out, okay, that's equivalent of adding an 18-cent levy, okay, to the community. So if I have a 30-cent bond and we do a non-voted $2 million 30-cent levy, and we do a $2 million non-voted bond, we're equivalent of a 48-cent levy for 20 years. And that comes from the bond person. That comes from Jim Nelson. So because he's working with the district right now, who's doing that, and that's the mathematics of it. So would I rather have a 40-cent bond or a 45-cent bond versus a 48-cent bond for 20 years? Because we've taken a combination of a levy and a bond measure. Personally, yes, but it's not ultimately my decision. I'm just trying to express, the finances of things as easily as I can. And we are not in debt.
Well, I showed you by 2029 being almost $500,000 negative reserves based upon a 40-cent levy.
That's if every capital facilities plan we have during that period of time was met.
Right, but what's the point of a capital facility plan if you're not buying the stuff on the schedule that you set up?
Because that's the way government works, Pat. There's no governmental entity that is able to say, we are going to be able to purchase this in this year because of everything else that comes up. Show me a city, show me a business that has to be or can't be dynamic with projections on a capital facilities plan. I mean, every business has to go, well, this year we can't afford that. It was planned for this year, but we can't afford that. We need to save up for another year. So it gets delayed. I mean, if it's going to be static, then I don't know what to do. I don't think having a static plan, I can't have a static operational plan. I mean, I have operational divisions within my current yearly budget, but some divisions have to be utilized for other divisions because things come up in other divisions that were unforeseen, and we have to overcome those to continue doing emergency services providing to the community. So I think this plan, maybe I shouldn't have developed it because it's not a static plan. It's a very dynamic plan, but it shows the public the projected needs and our hope of when we're able to overcome those needs in time and where the revenue is going to be coming from.
But I just don't see the plan here. I mean, you've got a plan to buy stuff, which you say is not set in stone, but you don't have a plan for income on this. I mean, you haven't run the figures for the various levy levels.
Well, we're already spending $648,000 a year, Pat.
Well,
and
we
so
know.
If I take a 45-cent levy, that gives us another $420-some thousand into the district. I'm already paying the revenue that we have coming in. We're spending that. We are putting pennies into reserve capacity, if anything, after every year. So we can't continue the way that we're going. I mean, that's the bottom line. We can't continue because we will not be able to maintain the services we're currently providing. And the last thing I want to do is revert backwards into be able to have volunteers or emergency services when somebody calls 911.
But I haven't heard anyone argue that you should keep it the way it is, that you should keep the revenue the same, and that you shouldn't buy stuff. No one's suggesting that, and you're the one that came up with this plan, and I think it's a good plan, but it's got to be based upon some financial reality. And as of yet, I haven't seen what those figures are other than the ones that I came up with.
So with an additional $420,000, if we took a 45-cent levy, $300,000 of that would be projected to go into raw reserves to start overcoming. Okay. And if you do that over 10 years, you have $3 million in reserve capacity that you're able to spend on infrastructure plans that we have laid out in our capital facilities plan. But that takes 10 years to overcome those items. And, you know, I've enjoyed the conversations that we've had. That's 10 years. So now we have 3 million. We still have another year or however many years it takes to develop the next million on the reserve capacity. Now let's take it down to 3.5 million because we're going to use 500,000 out of the current reserve capacity that we have. So after 10 years, we've been able to overcome, if we don't have any other issues, $3 million of our capital facility projections that are currently in this plan through 2036. That's where the money is going to go. Now, the other 120,000 of that goes back into operational expenditures to overcome the things we cannot currently do for the district, for the community, and for the volunteers that provide the services. That's where the money is going. So I don't know where you're seeing the huge capacity. Now, we have the ability to, let's say we take the 45-cent levy. I think that puts us right over $1 million a year. So every year we could take 1% on that. So we'd be bringing in an additional $10,000 a year into potential reserve capacity. So over 10 years, we've built up, you know, and that compounds, right? So that compounds, and I haven't done the math on that. So I apologize. I can do the math on that. But, you know, $10,000. So it brings us to $1,010,000. And then the next year we can take 1% off of that. So now it's $1,020,000, million, whatever. And those are rough numbers. Please don't hold me to those. But we have little increases there too. But you also have to understand that every year our operational expenditures are going up exponentially with the current environment that we're in. And in another 15 years, could I see us being in the same situation? Yes. And that's just the economics of things. But I think since 2012, I think, and before, even the fire chief before me did a good job of trying to put away as much money as possible while maintaining our responsibilities to the community and our operational day-to-day expenditures. And we've been able to develop, you know, over $1 million in reserve capacity currently. But as the plan shows, and that's what I'm trying to show the public, is that our needs are way above our current capacity and savings. And how do we overcome that? Well, it's going to take years to, you know, put some of that extra $420,000 away to start, you know, ticking off our list that we have, overcoming things that we can't even imagine now, potentially, right? And maybe they never happen. So let's say nothing else comes up. It'll take us still 10 years to build up and to overcome 3 million of this plan, which is a 13-year plan for the community.
So Christopher, I took your spreadsheet that showed what beginning cash and reserve revenues would be, revenues, operating expenses, and capital expenses. And I used all the same assumptions that you did. You started off in 2023 and went to 2036. Now, I did not do 45 cents. I did 40. I did 20, 30, 40, 50, and 60 cents per thousand, and ran it through all those years. So you're talking about, well, we might not have money for such and such. And so we'll have to delay that because we're saving up for 10 years. But you have put these assumptions on a timeline. You said, okay, on such and such a year, we're going to buy this. And at 2023 costs, it would be this much, but in 2027, it would be that much. But if you're now saying that, no, we may not be buying that in 2027, we'll be buying that in 2037, well, your cost structure has changed. And it would change for all of your items on this list. That's the point of a capital infrastructure plan, is to schedule them out so that you are able to tell how much money it's going to cost.
I understand, Pat, but our projections are just that. We don't know how much it's going to increase to buy a rig in 2 years. That is a projected factor. in there.
Right, but you put that,
In 2
you
years.
used a figure, you put that in.
I understand that, and that's the best numbers that we currently have. The best numbers available to us, and that was done with our financial manager and the county, and utilizing the projections over the last 5 years, and that's in my plan as well, right? So, yes, if we don't have the money, we can't do what is stated in that plan. That is a projected plan and our desire of when to replace certain items within the district. That has to be dynamic. It's just like
Okay, well, then I'll
any
just make
budget.
I'll just make one last point and then I'll let other people say it. But at 40 cents per thousand, based upon the schedule of purchases that you are talking about as it is now, at the end of 2029, you would have a negative 500,000 in reserves. And if it was 50 cents, you would have 119,000. So I don't even think your 45 cents is going to give you a surplus if you're buying these things on the schedule that supposedly you're planning on doing so, even though you're saying it's dynamic now.
Well, I understand that. If a schedule has to be placed, projections have to be made. And that goes along with anything, our home budgets, that I hope to buy a new refrigerator in a year. But my finances may not allow me to do that for different situations. And that's a very small item, but I'm trying to put it into perspective. I don't see any difference here when you're dealing with large items like we're doing, and not every item's on that list, especially remodeling the stairs for, the inclusion, diversity, and equity for our, volunteers. But it has to be movable. It has to be movable. And then when it's movable, the plan will be revised and updated so the public has a new idea of the projections for the community. And I think that in my perspective, and again, the commissioners make the final decision. If the commissioners want to go to a combination of a levy bond, then that's what the commissioners choose to do. If they go to a combination levy non-voted bonds, then we have to make sure the levy that's going to be taken out supports the payment of that bond. And I'll remind everybody, it's $75,000 per million of bond payment for 20 years. That's the current cost, okay, of that. And those numbers come directly from the bond issuer. So again, it's up to the commissioners, and I'm trying to lay out everything the best that I can with the people that I'm speaking with at the county and finance, and letting people understand that as we save money, it's going to be spent on the capital infrastructure that we've laid out in our plan. It may be 2 years delayed. And yes, there may be an extended cost to that particular item, but we may not have a choice to stay out of a bond issue, if we want to stay out of a bond issue, to pay an extra 4% for the item that we were supposed to purchase this year, but we can't until 2025. And I understand that some people, okay, 4% may be a lot, but what is $75,000? Because a bond issue is going to have to be in the millions to overcome our infrastructure. And we're tied to that cost for 20 years. Yes.
Didn't say that the chance of passing a levy increase and a bond for separate entities. One doesn't make it, then we're moved.
Well, the worst case scenario is if we go for a bond and levy, both on the same ballot, okay? And the bond passes, but the levy does not. We do not have the current capacity to support the bond improvements, to maintain the improvements of that bond. Of course, we buy something new, it's going to be under warranty for a couple of years, but I need to remind the public, we're only able to increase our budget right now by $6,000 a year. Our revenue income, we can only increase by 101%, 100% of last year's taxable revenue to 1% this year. And I think I'm saying that correctly. So I think it's very important to understand, and we go into debt as an agency. And if people are okay, if the commissioners are okay with passing on the debt to the next generation of this community, that is your choice. That is your choice, and they would have to accept that, obviously. But our revenue stream, our current revenue stream from the 2010 levy increase is now coming to an end to continue our operational coverage of this community. So Allison, would you like to go? Thanks for being patient.
No problem. So first question I have is how you have set up on that spreadsheet showing the change in the taxable percentages based on the increase of, 30, 35, 40 and home value. Would it be possible to do the same thing, adding a line item and saying, well, if we only had a 30-cent levy, but yet did a $2 million voter approved bond, because of course that's a separate line item for the GO bond, what that would do based on each home valuation, just so people could also see what the difference is as far as their taxable liability on their property taxes, so that they compare what it would be with a bond and a smaller levy versus just a straight levy.
Sure. So just so I repeat that back to you, you want to see another line item that would project what a certain amount of a levy would be on cost to home value, plus the cost of that particular levy to the home value as well. Is that correct?
Well, no. So if you were to do a bond initiative that was voter approved, that's a separate taxable property tax line item, like it's a GO bond. Right. So that you could see that, okay, if I have a $500,000 home and it's a 30-cent levy increase, it's going to be this amount. Excuse me. Plus, if we approved a $2 million bond, that would be this much per year on a $500,000 home. So people can see what the difference is between a voter approved 45-cent levy or a voter approved 30-cent levy with a $2 million bond.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Sure.
Just because also partly of what I'm thinking is I totally understand not wanting to put the district in debt, but I also look at the fact of the rising costs of everything that is continually increased, and it might be better to have a $2 million bond, yes, that we have to pay over 20 years, but at least those bonds, usually you have to purchase whatever infrastructure is under those bonds within 3 years. So you get that $2 million worth of items in 3 years at the prices over the next 3 years, rather than whatever inflated price it might be 10 or 12 years from now. The saving in the inflated price, I think, might counteract the interest on a bond. But I just think that'd be good numbers for people to be able to see the difference. Because I kind of look at it as, if I bought a home for my children 10 years ago at 3% interest at the home value then, compared to buying a home now at today's interest and today's home values, it was better for me to go into debt 10 years ago than it would for me to have tried to save 10 years till now. Does that make sense?
Oh, of course. Yeah. And I'll talk to the bond issuer and start working some math on that and see what I can come up with, of course.
Thank you.
Occur with finances. There was a time when we were paying 18% for loans. We went down to 3%.
So right now, bonds are very high. They're over 5%, as the bond issuer has stated. Who knows where that's going to go, especially if we go into recession. So that's something to consider, waiting a few years and seeing if the bond market goes back down to the 2 to 3%. That is also advantageous. I understand the question and I'll gain the numbers. In addition to that, I guess I would say, why don't we do a $4 million bond then? And pay for everything. Why are we waiting 13 years to do something when we should be paying for it now with the cost of it today? I think if we're going to do a bond, then we do a large bond and cover everything that we have projected in the capital facilities plan. We pay for it in today's dollars. And we get it done at the cheapest possible way for this community. Versus hanging out $2 million worth of infrastructure to try to overcome with a lower levy lid lift.
I totally agree with you, Chief. It would be great to actually even maybe similar to you listing the different rates for, based on the different levy lift amounts, throw in the different bond amounts. Well, if we did 2 million, 3 million, 4 million, because I agree with you, it would be better to do the 4 million. If we're going to do it, just do it.
Okay, I'll get that done. Thank you so much.
Anybody else want to speak?
So if we did do a bond measure
Mhm.
to overcome what we have projected in the capital facilities plan at this point, and do it at the cheapest way, that would be within the next 3 years and get everything accomplished, all new fire trucks, get the parking lot redone, and everything else that's listed in there, which a lot of those items don't need to be, right, that soon, because items do expire. We would be buying fire trucks that would be most likely for another 30 years. And that is a formidable fire truck that would be able to last us for 30 years. That's not something off a used market for that projection. Staff vehicles, additional vehicles for the community risk reduction. The bond then would be utilized for that infrastructure. We still have the problem with the levy.
Yeah.
So now we go back to the levy issue. We don't have, we're spending our operational levy. And that's what supports day-to-day operations within this district. Our ability to staff. So our volunteers are young men and women. The majority of them come in from Canada, and the majority of them don't get paid. They don't get anything for stipend purposes to go on a call. We can't outfit them with proper gear, and I don't want to continue that to where they have to come down here, spend thousands of their own money, and have to outfit themselves with gear. And grants are just that. They're a hope. And I can't rely on a gear grant every single year, that I'm going to get a grant for gear every single year. That's just not practical. So we still have a problem if we do a large bond, and it's a voted bond takes 60% approval. And if we do a voted bond, yes, we can have visual return very quickly on the money. People like to see the money being used, versus over a period of time on day-to-day operations. Not everybody uses 911. Some people in this community have never had to use 911. But I can almost guarantee you that everybody's going to have to use 911 at some point in their lives in the community, whether it's this community or a community that they move to and retire in and then decide to have their life in. So we still have a levy issue. So how do we overcome the levy issue? If we do a $4 million bond and we don't get a levy lid lift, we're upside down financially. Because now we have to maintain the improvements of that bond, and not everything's covered under warranty. Okay, on new vehicles and infrastructure and all of that, not everything's covered underneath warranties. So we do not have money to cover the improvements of those bonds. And getting an additional, basically, let's say $20,000, okay, over the next 3 years of when we have to spend that bond money. $20,000 is not enough to support 2 new fire trucks, parking lot and everything else, and the increase to that. We just did a projection on extending our exhaust system removal to the ambulance bay, because one of the biggest contributors to our cancer is actually vehicle exhaust. Believe that or not. Diesel exhaust, well studied. To extend that from the fire truck bay over here is over $100,000. To do 2 more hoses in the ambulance bay is over $100,000. That's our current estimate by the company, by Plymouth. Now, can I get a grant for that? Yeah, that's high on the grant spectrum. So I might be able to get a grant next year, or when the next grant process opens up, to be able to cover that expense. So,
You know, this is, I'm sitting here trying to think about business and investments and profits. And if you have a business that you are putting money into to develop it, to take money out, then you're looking at a very different picture of how you do investments. But our money comes to us through our levy. We're not making it through a market or something. And so it has to be paid for in a different way. And that's where the levy comes in. And we're spending all that money. We're not making money, we're spending it. So
I think it would be very irresponsible to go to acquire a bond. And I like the idea. I would love to buy this community a new fire truck tomorrow.
sure,
Okay.
that makes no sense.
And have better pumping capability, better safety for my firefighters riding around, having airbags, everything else. I would love to buy a new fire truck, okay, tomorrow for this community, and to parade it around and to show people this is how we protect the community. I would like to buy a brand new wildland truck to better prepare for wildfires in this community. But statistically, we have 1 or 2 grass fires a year. Right? Statistically, we've had 4 structure fires, you know, RVs, travel trailers, right? But 4 structures this year as well, which is out of the norm for us.
Which we have to fund.
Which we need to fund, right? And overcome. I mean, if we have a pump go down on a 30-year truck, it's going to be 30 grand to replace that pump. And do we put $30,000 into a 32-year-old fire truck? Well, we would have no choice but to do that. Now we have a brand new pump on a 32-year chassis and a rusting fire truck. So I want everybody to know, man, I enjoy these conversations, and there's no frustration on my part. I would love to have conversations over coffee, those types of things, to really lay this out and hear your side, see the numbers that you're coming up with. It takes time for me to verify and to validate if I get numbers by email and those things, because I have to go to certain people to do that. And I don't want to come back to the public and be wrong, right? And then have to come back. I think it would be irresponsible for me to support a plan that would projectively and most possibly put us into a situation that we take a low levy increase, we take a big bond, and then our levy gets overcome again on operational expenses within the next 10 years, and have to come out to the public again and say, sorry, by the way, we didn't take a big enough levy, right? We have all these beautiful improvements, but we didn't take a big enough levy. And now we're in the same situation as inflation and cost of doing daily business has put us in, and then ask the community again after 10 years that I need, or this district needs, more money to run daily operations. I don't know, maybe I'm by myself on this thinking, but if we can't have a levy that would support us again for, as this levy has, we're on our 13th year of this levy. I guess we got the funds in 2011, so 12 years on this levy. If we can't support again on a levy lid for at least 13 to another 15 years for this community, and they don't have to think about that increase again until that next 13 to 15 years, I believe that's not responsible. But it's also up to the public and up to the commissioners. And I can see this side of the equation as well, is what can people afford now? And would the public be okay with taking a lesser levy, taking a big bond, and potentially being in a financial conundrum again within that decade, and have to increase our levy again within that decade? Maybe they would be, because it would hit them less now than, and then they'd be willing to, yeah, I'll do it again in 10 years. These are the unknowns. And we're trying to do the best we possibly can with the brilliant minds that we have to put together a plan that doesn't overreach, that provides us stability to provide emergency services to our community, and improve, because our community's not getting younger, it's getting older. Our average age here is 58 and a half or 58.6 years, right around that in our community. I have to be able to overcome my loss of my mainstay volunteers as they retire out. I'll remind the public, three of my most prominent volunteers, I would say four, which includes my assistant chief, are 77, 74, late 60s and early 60s. And that's what you have, including myself, to respond to this community's emergency needs during the week. I hopefully will be able to sustain my 77-year-old for another 3 years. But he comes to the majority of calls during the week day. That's when all my volunteers are somewhere else. I don't have people coming into my office from this community to volunteer, because they have to be trained. You have to go to EMT school to be a medical provider, or you have to become a firefighter, or both. And that takes time, that takes energy, takes physical capability to do that. I can't have 20 people standing outside of a structure when somebody's trapped, when I have nobody trained as a firefighter. That's where the blessing of the young men and women and the allowance by customs over the last 2 to 3 decades. And I understand Canadians have been a part of this agency since the 1980s, but at a lesser degree, because the majority of volunteers from the 1980s came from this community. And because of their age growing out and them retiring out, it flipped. Now we're a majority young men and women, Canadian, fully trained volunteers. Those men and women come over with all their training completed. They've spent 10 to 16 grand or more of their money to get the certifications that I require before I'll even hire them for this community. I expect educated, credentialed, certified people, both on the medical side and the firefighter side. I'm not going to send somebody through a 2-week academy and say, you're good to go to fight fire. We have the responsibility is huge, right? That we have, but every fire chief before me has been in the same situation. I feel blessed that we have the budget that we currently have, because I think everybody has, especially some of the people on the meeting today, have been impacted by the services that we provide this community and all the outreach that we do for this community through this agency. I think that is a responsibility of this agency, to step up where we can, when we can, and provide that help. But it takes people to be able to do that, and it takes money to be able to do that, because they have to be geared correctly. They have to have the protection. They have to have the uniforms and the training. But everybody needs to understand, I spend very little money on the Canadian volunteers. that come across to potentially give their life if they have to go into a structure when there's a rescue that needs to be done for $15 if they're getting paid anything. And yes, they've chosen to be here. Yes, most of them move on to career organizations, but they've spent tens of thousands of dollars just to get here. And I think that's a value that needs to be expressed.
Any other questions? Want to discuss more?
Our next meeting is on the 12th, so we can take the information, and I truly appreciate, Pat, I appreciate your comments. I enjoy the conversation. Allison, thank you so much. I'll do my best to gather up the numbers. I may have to reach out to you again in order to clarify, to make sure that I can gather up those numbers. Pat, I'll start working on some projections and hopefully be able to finalize that too. But right now, the numbers we're using is my operational budget is what we're spending at this point. So my operational budget is, everybody can see where the money's going in the operational budget that's published online. And then the projections of the operational needs in the future over the next 13 plus years, and the need for capital expenditures. So, and it's ultimately up, to the commissioners, but, personally, I'd rather stay debt free. But if there's a combination, levy or bond, the fear is having both of those on the ballot is the bond passes, the levy fails. And then we're in the same circumstance that we're here now, and we'll be flipped up financially, upside down. At that point, we'd have to start looking at our budget and saying, what areas are we going to start cutting? And that's reality. That's not a fear tactic. That's reality, as you would have to do on any budget, your home budgets, all of that. We'd have to start cutting back, and we'd have to prioritize certain areas in that. And if that's our reality, that's our reality. I would not want that for this community. So if we do a levy and then a non-voted bond, everybody needs to remember the payment of that bond. And that would have to come out of the current revenues of the levy that is in place at the time. So it takes either $75,000 or $150,000 off the top of our revenue stream each and every year. A voted levy, I think we can go up to, I don't want to say that. I was going to say, I'm not going to say it, but it's in a voted levy because of our evaluation. We can go over 4 million. I want to say, I think we can go up to 7 million. I'm pulling that off the top of my brain, but a non-voted bond, our cap is at 3.5 million. But 3.5 million is $225,000 payment every single year. Is that correct? 75 times 3. And our revenue would have to support that. And right now our revenue has no way of supporting that.
That's scary.
So, but I'm, let's have the conversations. I don't want people to get upset. Let's have the conversations and do our best to come up with a solution that fortifies the future of this district and our internal needs, both operationally and infrastructurally.
Have a motion to adjourn? We'll adjourn the meeting today at 5:29. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Let's keep going and we'll get more educated each time.
Okay, our next meeting, everybody, is on the 12th at 4 p.m. And I really want to thank everybody for coming here and the questions and the comments that we've had today. I'll do my best to come up with some answers for you. So thanks, everybody.